Welcome to my talk. So that's the usual stuff. I'm Richard. We're always looking for people. A little bit about who I was that might be more important in this context here. For about 7 years, I was solely responsible for a quite large network, and literally, without proper monitoring back at the time, I wouldn't be here because being on call for about 7 years is challenging in some regards. I really, really like monitoring. I despise and hate most monitoring tools for various reasons. Back then, the only thing which was really any good and usable, at least in my opinion, was SABX. But this is not about SABX. A little bit of context about the company I'm coming from, because this is, or which I joined recently, because this is one of the prime examples of brownfield deployments. It's actually the oldest commercial ISP in Germany, so there's a lot of installed base. There's a lot of installed tools which are legacy, which were way ahead of their time, but some have aged better, some not so much. So there is a push to modernize. We do have one global monitoring solution, which is called WatchCat and WatchDog. It's not really dashboardy. It's more like just send email for every last piece of crap, and yeah. And all the teams, they have their own stuff on top, which is better or worse depending on which team you have. And you don't really have anything of a way to collect and correlate data and just do useful things with it. You can look at it and that's it, and then it's gone because it's not machine readable. This is probably true for most people who are not designing it today. So how did I come across Prometheus? I did want to run FOSDEM, which some of you might know. With LibreNMS, because this worked well for DebConf, it was suggested to use something else, and this was really, really good. We had a POC, and we decided to switch over to Prometheus in basically less than a day, because it's just that good. So one slide which I just added while being here, how many of you know what Prometheus is and how many people tried it? Yeah, not the three of you. So who has it in production? Great. Who has it at a POC?
POC is broad, right?
Everyone has a testing environment. Some people even have a production one. Yeah, no. So just small summary of what Prometheus actually is and why it's so interesting, because this is surprisingly unknown in this room. It's incredibly efficient. You can look at pretty much every other system which you have as of right now, and Prometheus is more efficient. This is in part due to it focusing on metrics and basically ignoring events, which is a trade-off. Also, it only stores numbers, float 64, which is also a trade-off, but this makes it incredibly efficient. And yeah, you can do things which you can't do with anything else. You don't have any hierarchical model. You basically apply labels as you want, and then you just slice and dice your data according to whatever metric you need. You can do it by customer, you can do it by data center, you can do it by production environment or development or whatever, and you can just aggregate the data in any way which you want. Speaking of aggregating data, if you know R, PromQL is kind of ish like R in as much as it does a lot of vector magic automatically. You don't even really have to think about this being vector math. You just select stuff and everything else happens automatically. It's, again, an incredibly efficient language. And the same language is used for everything. So if you want to show a graph, that's one language. It's exactly the same language for alerting. So you can actually use the same thing for alerting and for graphing, which makes a lot of things quite easy to do. And also, if you export any data, you again use the same language. It's even the case that if you do graphing, basically what happens in the background is that you get the raw data and then you just have JavaScript which does the graphing for you. So this is, everything is very consistent across the whole ecosystem. Delta of delta storage makes it very, very efficient, incredibly storage efficient. Who knows what delta of delta is? Okay, not the three of you. So basically, you don't store the raw data. You take the delta of sequential values. And then you take the delta of those deltas, which is fascinating as a concept and gives you incredible storage amounts or incredibly low storage amounts. There's a paper by Facebook called Gorilla, or about Gorilla. If you're interested in this topic, have a look. It's really, really interesting. And as it's Go, you basically have one binary, you have a container or whatever, and you just deploy and you run and it's working. So, as I said, we are an ISP. We have quite a few SNMP devices, probably the most on Earth, at least within Prometheus, simply because we ran into problems which no one else had. So this kind of implies that no one else was using it more than us. The Python implementation basically got the whole system into a really bad state, and it was more or less unusable. With even only 300 devices, we basically locked down the whole machine. It just didn't work. While the set of affected devices was pretty much stable, the ones which came up and down and up and down, we never found a root case. We just took some money, asked Brian to re-implement in Go, and ever since then it's been stable. There are a few pitfalls because a lot of stuff in the networking world, I don't know, who of you has a lot of actual hardware and network hardware? That many, yay. Everyone else be glad about that. There's quite a few fishy things going on in the SNMP implementations around the world, and basically, if the data is not as the Prometheus Go library, the client library expects it, things start to break, and it appears to be rather hard to work around this. So basically, what you have to do is you just use the Python implementation for those kind of things, which is a working workaround, but it's not very nice. There are some caveats to the Python implementation and also some to both, especially when things are weird. But else, everything else in the whole Prometheus ecosystem is more or less brutally obvious. It's highly efficient, and you are just done days after you started. So that's it with basically having your brownfield monitoring in cloud-native technology. No, it's not, because this wasn't the hard challenge. As it turns out, this was really simple. It was a matter of days and weeks, and things just worked and kept getting better and better. Prometheus itself is just incredible. But the real challenge was the social kind, because you've got a lot of installed base, you've got a lot of stakeholders, and these have their own motivation, and they're very resistant to change. Obviously, you have the issue that most of the times, if you look at operations teams, they're actually incentivized to be against change because they want one stable system which doesn't change, and they just keep it up and running. Because change is hard. It's really hard, unless your processes actually embrace change and you can make it manageable by computers, not by humans, because humans are slow and expensive. They're creative, but slow and expensive. So you have to show the trade-off for the people who actually run it between what's new and what they have. Why should they embrace the change? Why do they do this? And also, simple due diligence, you have to keep the old systems running, because you can't just say, okay, everything's new, and if something breaks, oh, who cares? You have to have it maintained in parallel, unfortunately. This introduces more toil. Toil, if the word is basically my definition of toil is if you have work which is repeated and which does not give benefit and which is manual and humans have to do it, that's toil. And you want to avoid toil. If your teams are busy firefighting and just up to here with work, they can't really engineer your ecosystem at your company. And that is one of the most important problems which I saw, because people don't have time to actually do the new stuff which will save them time later. So while implementing, try and keep the teams free of extra effort. Try to free up time to them and to really make them see that this is the better system. But still, there will be people who are not convinced, which is normal. Another thing which, at least for the operations guys, is really important is to keep their sanity. So when you redo things anyway, do it right. Split up importance and urgency, and be quite rigorous about what you alert on. If it's not actionable, if no human can just say, okay, I need to do this, this is not an alert. Don't alert on it. Log it, have it for someone else, but don't alert. Same if it's not urgent. Don't alert. If it's important, do it during business hours, either before or after, depending on when you realize the problem, but don't do it at night, because this will wear people out, and they'll hate you for it. And once you show them that they have more sleep, because they don't get paged for every last thing, which doesn't matter at all, they start to embrace this, and they actually work on getting the new system rolled out and to cut off the old crap. Yeah, and kind of obvious, but still it has to be said, if you can't monitor a service, it can't go into production, period. Easy as that. It should be obvious, but way too often it's not, unfortunately. So one specific thing which helped within the company and helped quite well was we had an incident where basically someone forgot to set a certain flag, and so one mail server was not behind the normal ACL. Spammers are really good these days, so they do a staggered ramp up. They see, okay, does this machine have the power? Does it have the bandwidth to be really useful? But they do it slowly to see if anyone catches them, sorry. And only then they will really start spamming. And obviously they do it during nighttime for your local time zone, because they know that's when people won't be looking, and then they can send the most spam. So this is really, from engineering point of view, they did it really well. From our point of view, it kind of sucked. So the guy who was on call, he literally took less than 30 seconds to realize what was wrong, because he had Prometheus. Before that, he would have had to look at logs. He would have had to look at various distributed systems, log it into 10 different things to look at 20 different things. With Prometheus and Grafana, it was just one single thing, and he knew what's up. So all of a sudden, you have buy-in from people who might not be fully convinced before. This one incident convinced maybe 10 people in various teams just overnight that, yes, this is the way forward. And before, they were more like, I don't know. And all of a sudden, they see their own incentive, and they want to use it. But the thing about incentives, it's also about perspective. So someone once said, and this really stuck with me, that it's quite easy to talk to an engineer for hours about a specific function, but his CEO will not care, not at all. And that's okay, because everyone has a different perspective towards the same thing. They might even agree in principle, but they don't even realize it. So your managers will care about revenue, about process execution, about all the high-level stuff, but they don't care about the low-level stuff. Your architects want clean design. They also want clean process definition. But this is basically almost the same thing, but not quite. If you've got a service owner, he wants a powerful dashboard, and he wants to have as little technical in-depth knowledge as possible, because that's not his business and not what he's there for. At least sometimes, unfortunately. Team leads, they will care about their team being quick and of high morale. Operators, they just want to sleep when they're on call. Because let's face it, unless you're distributed across the whole world and can have people who are on call during daytime, getting called during the night, yeah, it sucks. So basically what you need to do is you need to tell every single person who has a stake in the whole system what they need to hear. You never lie. You're completely blunt and open and honest, but you make them see where their own intrinsic motivation is and how they can apply this to this whole big picture. Because this is really what you have to do. You have to have a large, big picture, which you draw on the wall, either literally or proverbial, doesn't matter. Just make sure to document it. You show people what they really care about, what's their motivation, what's their benefit from agreeing to this and helping you go there where you want to go. And once you have buy-in, people all over the company will start to make small incremental steps. And every time they have to take a decision, if they want to implement some policy or some process or whatever, in this way or in that way, they can look to the big picture. And if they all agree, they will all make small steps in the right direction without having to synchronize. Again, this should be obvious. I found it's not. Another very nice thing which kind of mixes the technical aspect back into the whole picture is when you leverage this kind of system. Because the one thing, or one of the many things which Prometheus does really well, is it allows you to have so much data and to correlate so much data in unexpected ways and in really smart ways that you can do things which you couldn't do before. Simple as that, you could not do them before, at least not with the same resource usage. So all of a sudden, someone comes up with the idea to actually show how much power an actual service from a customer is using. So all of a sudden, you can really quantify this much kilowatt hours is being used for this period of time for exactly this one service, which they couldn't before. Me coming from the networking side, when you've got optical networks which are just barely working, and you have just enough dampening that it's just working, outside temperature can be a factor. And if you're able to actually map downtimes in parts of your network against outside temperatures, we had an issue with when there was high traffic and a sharp decline or rise in temperature, then one particular line would go out. Try finding that with a traditional system. Back then, it took us months to realize what the issue was. Once we had it, it was trivial. But these kind of systems give you the possibility to actually do this proactively. And something very nice, because people make mistakes. Very often, people put in servers, and they just plug onto the same feed. So if that one feed goes down, UPS has an issue, or a fuse is blown, or whatever, all the systems are down. And then when the other take over, you all of a sudden have way too much load on the other feed because there's ramp up on the other feed, and then you blow the second fuse, and then you're completely offline. So this is something which all the people who are running on cloud servers don't really care about because it's done for them. But people who are actual hardware, this is something where you can have really, really bad time with, because this takes out the whole site. So unless you have a second or third site, you're done. And there's lots more. I suggest you look at the talk of Fabian about alerting. It's pure genius, and you really see what you can do with Prometheus. It's one of the best talks of all time, at least in my opinion. So the leverage of this one source of truth is the correlation, but it's also something else. Because all of a sudden you have one oracle which anyone can ask, and they get the same answer if they ask at least similar questions. So all of a sudden, everyone agrees on the metrics and agrees on what's happening because they have the same data. They don't have slightly different data which is slightly weird or something. They don't have invisibility where some monitoring systems have high system load while they collect and don't see their own system load. Moonin would be an example. So we had those spikes in Prometheus every 5 minutes, but Moonin didn't see them because it was itself causing it. And during this time, it wasn't collecting any data. So operations was sure they didn't have any spikes and Prometheus was broken. And I'm like, no, it's here. You have to find it. When everyone has the same data, obviously it's very important to actually have good data, but then a lot of things become easier. Tactical overviews are more or less obvious. What's broken now, not what's broken 5 minutes before, not constant updates and push notifications on what's broken. You have one overview for each team, which shows what's relevant to them as of right now. Dashboards and drill down are equally as obvious. Something which wasn't obvious for us, at least at first, was to have the same dashboards, or at least the same graphs, automatically exported into BF based on our configuration management system or on our service database. Because then the service manager basically just clicks a button and yes, this customer has 10 new servers or whatever. It's automatically part of their SLA report. It's automatically part of whatever you have for them. If you've got specific dashboards, it just happens. But being able to auto-generate all those reports is really, really nice. You also have quite an easy time to give your sales teams a whole new insight into your data. So for example, for us, we are really, really good at keeping systems up. And we are really good at exceeding our SLO. So now we can prove this. We can give sales statistics across all our customers, obviously without naming them and everything, but across all the customers, and we can say, okay, for the last quarter, for the last year, there was not a single SLO violation on any of the systems which we run. This is gold for sales. And all of a sudden you have sales which, and sales becomes excited about a monitoring system. This is quite interesting to see. Yeah, and also you can put your business data into Prometheus. There was one question earlier by some guy, I don't know, about keeping operational and business data in the same Prometheus instance. For us, the answer is yes, at least as long as it's absolute values. If it's relative values, which you might miss during scraping, that's not a good idea. But if it's absolute values, you can absolutely do it. Don't do it for medical data. So pacemakers or so might not be the ideal use case for Prometheus. But for normal usage counters or whatever, just toss them in there and you're done. Because if all you have is a hammer, you have to choose the hammer really well. We're not done yet, and we probably will never be done because then it would become boring. So for us, what we still have to do is to basically merge all our configuration management, especially across different teams, because Unix and Windows are using different systems, which made sense at the time, but doesn't make sense anymore. Where possible, but this again is something where we are kind of special because we have highly specific setups for some customers. And they might not be actually brittle, but still very special snowflakes. So it's kind of hard to get those into a state where you can auto-scale. And this is a hard technical problem, but as long as the revenue is coming in for all those old systems, the customers don't really want to change. And after all, the customer decides what they want to do. You can't force them. You can tell them what's better. You can use your technology to support their case, but you can't force them to do anything. A huge thing which we need to do is to adopt error budgets, where basically you have a feedback loop towards developers that when their systems break, for this quarter, for this half year, for this whatever, they can't release any new features. So all of a sudden they they have a real incentive to not ship broken stuff, because normally they just ship it and operations, yeah, they're on call. Development isn't on call. So DevOps is going in that direction, but to do it a lot stronger, to SRE versus DevOps. Yeah. And also to do, if you're in Munich or want to move to Munich, come talk to me. Questions? Yes.
I was a little late. I may have missed it. Could you talk a little bit about like how you migrated your alert triggers from whatever previous system you were using to the new system? Prometheus?
Basically, did everyone get the question, or should I repeat?
It's good to repeat.
Okay. So question was how to migrate old triggers and old alerting to the new system. And the answer is quite simple: keep everything in parallel. That's what I meant with due diligence. You cannot afford to miss any important alert, because at this point you really start breaking things. So what you have to do for at least some time, keep the old system running, keep the new system running, and build up the confidence across all the teams that this is actually working. So for some times you have 2 triggers. But this is also a chance, because then people start to realize, okay, this one thing just carpet bombs me with emails, and this other thing does it once and does it nicely. So you actually increase incentive for people to change. But yes.
How do you? So I have a problem where I have 2,000 plus triggers that need to get moved over into Prometheus. Like, any tips for maintaining parity between the? And I'm coming from sort of Zabbix, which doesn't have configuration. None of this is managed in configuration. Obviously, have any like tips for managing parity or like converting 2,000 without having to do it by hand?
So the question was how to transform 2,000 Zabbix triggers into Prometheus triggers.
I have one good tip. The one good tip that we did is we picked a class of trigger. So we said, this week we're going to work on removing all of the check HTTP triggers and replace them with black box exporter. And we just went through our code base of all the Nagios checks for check HTTP and just did a big, huge add Prometheus and created a pending change to remove the old ones. And then as soon as we were confident and we did some testing that the new one would work, we just deleted that one class. We did it by class. That managed the amount of work needed to remove all those things.
So Ben's answer, just for the recording, was to basically define a class of, or type of class of alerts, and move by batches of class, or within the class, one type of alert, and then move those over. But my answer is actually one step further backwards, because you should have documentation at some point what you're actually alerting on. What are your service definitions? What are your SLOs? There should be something which actually defines what you're doing and why you're doing it. If you're not doing this, this is the perfect time to do it now, because you have to do it at some point, because else you will not have clean services. It's impossible, because you might be winging it, you might be incredibly smart and have it all in your head. You might have an incredible team and 10 people have it all in their head, but without it being written down and really documented, this will degrade over time. And then class-wise is good, or host-wise, or do whatever, but class-wise is probably better. Any more questions? Yes. No worries.
Had you guys ever considered like creating like tests for these different alerts? That's one thing we've been thinking about, like, to maintain parity.
Yeah. So the question was if we thought about creating tests. The answer is yes, of course. Even taking it a step further, we have canaries. So canaries.
Okay.
So this is not fully implemented yet, but it was at the old company, and we're planning to do the same, where you basically have fake alerts during normal business hours, and you test the whole escalation. for all the different types of alerts which you have and all the different teams. And then, of course, this is manual, but then you have to document, okay, this works. And so you always know that your monitoring is basically working. So yes, testing is important because else things might just die. Do you have another question?
No.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
No worries. You just kept agreeing, no questions?
Quite interesting. I'm debating advocating a migration strategy towards chronics, but it's going to be a difficult road to take.
He said sales got interested in graphs, marketing got interested in graphs, and that's you get the whole business behind it.
Yeah, so the comment was basically, or the short version of this was that it's good to have buy-in from marketing and from sales and other stakeholders. And yes, because normally you have like this little island of tech people and you might even have management, and they kind of agree. But without the whole company agreeing on this being a good thing, you will always have blockage at some point. So try really to think about how to motivate people who are not part of your team. You might not even be the same department. What's their motivation to do the same thing and to agree with you and to tell them again. And then when you have a use case or a showcase like this mail server thing, keep telling people.
Still need to instrument the coffee machine.
Sorry?
Still need to add some instrumentation to our coffee machine. Then you can get everybody on board.
Well, as you know, the first webcam was of a coffee machine. But you should have alerting
Yep.
on when the coffee runs out.
It's about
So, so I take it no more questions? Thank you very much.